and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music. I'm your host, the 80s Mixtaper, and for the uninitiated, let me give you the elevator pitch. Back in 2016, nearly a decade ago in May, while coming back from a family birthday, I decided on a whim to try and listen to every charting entry in the UK charts from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989, which, by the time Covid rolled around, I had completed. Thousands of singles, lots of shoulder pads, spandex and hairspray, some Kylie and Jason, some Adamant, some Billy Joel, and I was done. And I enjoyed it so much I actually started again, but thankfully by 2023 I decided a better use of my time might be to spread the gospel of 80s music, and this podcast was born. Each week we look at the biggest, brightest and most bonkers bands of the most colourful decade, get into the starts, the breakups and the makeups, and dissect the songs which made the 80s what they were. Now, sadly, due to copyright laws, we can't play the songs on the pod, but fear not, I have created hyperlinked 13-song playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, which you will find in the episode description, plus a full track listing so you too can listen along. Each week, we inch the calendar forward and cover either the first 7 or the last 6 songs of the playlist, giving you a weekly fix of 80s fun. So where are we today? Well, folks, we cross now into spring 1982. We have arrived in March and playlist 38. We kick off with one of the strangest number ones of the decade, a song which is often forgotten but quickly remembered, courtesy of the Goombay dance band. Imagination and Classix Nouveaux deliver their high watermarks. Gary Numan drops a bassline classic which is eventually co-opted by Alan Partridge, and we also hear from Genesis, Chaz and Dave, and reggae champion Pluto. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. We start today with a one-hit wonder, but it's one which, if you were alive in the 80s, weirdly you will know the name, although I'm 90% sure you've forgotten the song. In the spring of 1982, the British public was feeling particularly adventurous, or perhaps just particularly confused. The Falklands War was brewing, the charts were a dizzying mix of new romantic synth pop and new wave, and for 3 straight weeks, the most popular song in the United Kingdom was a piece of Caribbean-flavoured German kitsch called 7 Tears. This is a song that sounds like it was designed by a committee that had once seen a postcard of Barbados but spent their entire lives in a Hamburg recording studio. It's got a low-speed beat that's more Bavarian beer hall than tropical beach, a spoken word bridge delivered with the earnestness of a Shakespearean monologue, and a melody that bears a suspicious resemblance to Auld Lang Syne. It's the ultimate holiday in paradise souvenir, bright, slightly tacky, and destined to be remembered primarily for its bizarre fire-eating performances on Top of the Pops. But for Oliver Bent and the Goombay dance band, 7 Tears wasn't a joke. It was the culmination of a very specific, very successful vision. This is track 1, playlist 38. Press play now. 7 Tears was a song that spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the UK singles chart, starting in late March 1982 after a slow chart run from the end of February. It was a massive million-selling hit, and yet it represents the only time the Goombay dance band ever truly conquered the British market, following a string of smaller hits like Aloha Until We Meet Again. It's at this moment we need to introduce Oliver Bent. He wasn't some Caribbean writer. He was a German show business veteran born Jörg Nock in Potsdam on October the 29th, 1946. Bent was a former child actor who appeared in the 1955 film Königswalzer, a member of the Regensburg Cathedral Boys Choir, and a musical theatre performer who starred in German productions of Hair and Hello Dolly. He was a man who knew how to put on a show, specifically a show that involved fire breathing, which became his signature move during the band's televised performances. In the late 1970s, Bent spent some time living on the Caribbean island of St. Lucia. He was captivated by the local music, and he decided to bring that tropical joy back to Europe. He named his new project Goombay dance band after a small bay on the island. The Goombay dance band was essentially a touring group of Oliver Bent, Alicia Bent his wife, Dorothy Hellings, Wendy Dawson and Mario Slingard. Ernest Clinton was also a vital member and collaborator from the group's founding, eventually taking over as lead singer years later. They were essentially an alternative to Boney M, another group created by a German producer to sell a sanitised disco-inflected version of Caribbean culture to the masses. Their breakthrough came in 1979 with Son of Jamaica. While it barely made a dent in the UK at the time, failing to reach the top 40, it was a monster in mainland Europe, topping the German charts for 9 weeks and eventually selling over 11 million copies worldwide. By the time Seven Tears arrived in late 1981, written by Wolf Eckhart Stein and Wolfgang Jass, the band was already a certified hit machine in Germany. Seven Tears was the lead single from their third album, Holiday in Paradise. Lyrically, it's a standard lost love trope, but it's the execution that makes it interesting. You have the slow umpire-like beat, and then of course the bridge, a spoken word piece. In the UK, the song's success was aided by the band's flamboyant appearances on Top of the Pops. It was only the fourth time a German act had topped the UK charts, following Boney M and Kraftwerk's The Model. But the Goombay sunset quickly in Britain. After Seven Tears, the band never reached the UK top 40 again. Their follow-up album, Born to Win, failed to chart as well. Bent continued to tour and record, releasing a 30th anniversary collection in 2009 before officially retiring in late 2016, shortly after his 70th birthday, passing the lead vocal role to Ernest Clifton. Ultimately, Seven Tears exists as a bizarre sun-drenched artefact of 1982, a moment the British public decided that what they really needed was a German singing about rivers of tears with a fire-breathing flourish. For track 2, let's stay with the Caribbean-infused flavour as we meet another one-hit reggae act with just a little cheeky humour mixed in. In the mid-1970s, the UK charts were a playground for the peculiar. You had novelty records, glam rock holdovers, and the slow, steady rise of reggae as a commercial powerhouse. But then there's this specific lane of storytelling reggae, songs that weren't just about the rhythm, but were essentially 3-minute sitcoms. They were funny, they were racy, and they were distinctly Jamaican. And somewhere in the heart of it was a man named Leighton Keith Shervington, though everyone, literally everyone, knew him as Pluto. Pluto Shervington had this uncanny ability to take a social taboo or a scandalous situation and turn it into an amusing hit. He did it with Dat in 1976, a song about a Rasta trying to buy pork without saying the word. He did it with Ram Goat Liver, an ode to the alleged aphrodisiac properties of a certain soup. But today, we're looking at the song that brought him back to the UK top 20 years after his initial peak. A song about a man, a closet, and a very angry husband. This is Your Honour. Press play now. Pluto Shervington was born on the 13th of August 1950 in the St Andrew parish of Kingston, Jamaica. Music wasn't just a hobby for him, it was in his blood, though his father wasn't exactly thrilled about it. His mother encouraged his musical pursuits as long as he did his schoolwork, but his father would not buy him the guitar he wanted, so Pluto built his own. By 16, he was in his first band, The Presidents, in 1966, and by 1968 he was leading Tomorrow's Children, a popular show band that became a staple of the Jamaican circuit. But the 1970s saw Pluto evolve. He was still a singer, but he was also a bassist, a producer, and a recording engineer at Federal Records, working alongside heavyweights like Ernie Smith. This technical background gave his music a certain polish. He wasn't just making funny songs, he was making high-quality productions that happened to be hilarious. Which leads us to this track. The story of Your Honour is actually one of delayed gratification. While it feels like a quintessential 80s reggae pop crossover, It was actually released in 1975 on the Wildflower label and CBS Records in the UK. It was not an immediate chart hit, and it wasn't until early 1982 that the song finally reached number 19 on the UK singles chart. The song itself is a delightful social comedy. It's framed as a courtroom plea. Our protagonist has been caught in a woman's closet by her irate husband. He's been badly beaten and is now standing before the court trying to explain away the insurmountable evidence of his guilt. His defence: pure unadulterated nonsense delivered with a straight face. He claims he was a complete stranger, just minding I own business in the closet. The punchline, the part everyone sang along to, is his explanation for why he was naked. "Me two hand dem was occupied, me shirt in me left hand, me pants in me right. Dear Judge, can this court accept my story from the heart?" Despite the racy nature of the lyrics, the song fits perfectly into the traditions of calypso and reggae storytelling. Pluto's delivery is key. He sounds like a man who genuinely believes his own absurd lies, which only makes the comedy land harder. Pluto's career didn't end with the charts. In Miami, where he migrated in the late 1970s, he became a living legend, literally receiving the Living Legend Award at King's House, Jamaica in 2004. For years, he was a fixture at the Bahama Breeze restaurant in Kendall, Florida. From 2018, when not on tour, he performed solo sets there several times a week, mixing his hits with Bob Marley covers and songs ranging from calypso to the Eagles' Hotel California. Pluto Shervington passed away at a hospital in Miami on the 19th of January 2024 at the age of 73 due to complications from pneumonia. He left behind a legacy of laughter and easy listening reggae that bridged the gap between the gritty roots of the island and the global pop stage. Let's remember him as a singer and a storyteller who's understood that sometimes the best way to tell the truth is to tell a really good lie about a closet. For track 3, we are back with one of my favourites from the early decade and a particular high point for this band. And wow, what a song. If you love funk, this one is for you. I have been known to leave this song on repeat for half an hour. I digress. We're in London, 1982. The glitter of the 70s disco ball has shattered. It's been replaced by the neon hum of the Roland Jupiter 8. But while the US was busy declaring disco sucks, the UK was doing something much more interesting. They were making Brit funk, and they were making it weird, making it smooth, and making it undeniably British. At the centre of this velvet revolution was a trio who took their name from a John Lennon song, a tribute to the late Beatle, and their wardrobe was a fever dream of ancient Rome and the fairy tale East. When we last checked in on Imagination in 1981, they were the new kids on the block with Body Talk. That song was a slow burn, slow dance that entered the UK singles chart in May and eventually spent 18 weeks in the top 50, peaking at number 4. Produced by the soon-to-be legendary duo Tony Swain and Steve Jolly, it proved that British soul didn't have to be a pale imitation of Motown. It could be something else: slinky, sparse, hot under the collar, smouldering and deeply atmospheric. But as 1981 turned into 1982, the band, lead singer Lee John, bassist Ashley Ingram and drummer Errol Kennedy weren't looking to repeat themselves. They were looking for something bigger, something that felt less like a song and more like a hallucination. This is Just an Illusion. If you've got a good set of speakers or headphones, turn this one up. This is track 3, press play now. That continual bassy keyboard line, that echoing refrain. Could it be that? It's just an illusion. Nothing quite beats this song. It is a masterpiece and I love it. The story of Just an Illusion begins at Red Bus Studios in London. After the success of the Body Talk album, which yielded 2 more top 20 hits in and Out of Love and Flashback, both peaking at number 16, the pressure was on. Imagination were a phenomenon and now they needed a follow-up. Lee John, a former backing singer for groups like the Delphonics and chairman of the board, had become one of the most recognisable faces in the country. famously known for his flamboyant TV performances in Gold Lame and Exotic Silks. To craft their follow-up album, In the Heat of the Night, they teamed up with Swain and Jolly. The producers brought a clinical, high-fidelity precision to the band's natural groove. For Just an Illusion, they leaned into a post-disco sound, striking a balance between synthesised textures and a rhythm section anchored by Errol Kennedy, who brought precision from his Boys Brigade and Air Training Corps background. Released in March 1982, the single was an immediate smash. It peaked at number 2 on the UK singles chart, held off the top spot for 3 weeks by the first song of this episode, Goombay dance band's 7 Tears. But while it missed number 1 at home, its impact was global. It charted across Europe and became a top-tier club hit, eventually peaking at number 27 on the Billboard R&B chart in the US. The lyrics, co-written by the band and their producers, captured a specific early 80s anxiety, the search for destiny and the questioning of reality. As the track suggests, the search for truth often leads to the realisation that what we perceive is often just an illusion. That philosophical depth, paired with Lee John's soaring falsetto, turned the song into a standard. Decades later, its DNA would resurface in unexpected places, most notably when Mariah Carey sampled it for a 2005 hit Get Your Number. Imagination would go on to have more hits. Music and Lights reached number 5 later that year, but Just an Illusion remains their definitive statement. For track 4, we're back with one of the coolest, darkest people in the 80s. He's a man who could claim to be the founder of synthpop. But this next song reminds me of one television scene and one television scene only. It's 2002 and Alan Partridge is bored. He's in his static home while his new house is being built. He's awaiting a visit from the tax inspectors, and as he pensively waits, he puts a song on his stereo, this next song. It has a famously slow burn beginning, and while the pressure builds, he puts away the remnants of a cooked breakfast using a cuddly toy beef eater to wipe away the bean juice. And just as the track explodes into life, he dons an imaginary bass guitar and in his own little world absolutely air guitars the track to death. Meanwhile, the tax inspectors arrive, knock on the door, and lost in his own pop star world, he kicks the door open. What follows is him greeting the tax inspectors embarrassingly, while still holding the imaginary bass guitar, going so far as to mimic taking it off before catching himself doing it. But isn't there a little Partridge in all of us? The pathos is real, folks. Anyway, when we last spoke about Gary Numan, it was 1981. He was 23 years old, standing on the stage at Wembley Arena, telling the world he was done. He was retiring from touring, exhausted by the Numan mania. This had turned him from a shy boy from Hammersmith into a pop culture lightning rod. He'd just finished a collaboration with Dramatis, the band formed by his former backing musicians, on the track Love Needs No Surprise, which we heard in episode 33. It felt like a graceful exit, a final bow before the machines were switched off. But Gary Numan had never been particularly good at staying still. In fact, technically, he took to the sky. He decided to fly a light aircraft around the world. It was up there, somewhere between the clouds, and up there with the gods, that the next version of Gary Numan began to hum. This is Music for Chameleons. Don your imaginary bass guitars now. This is the sound of Gary Numan finding a second life. The story of Music for Chameleons begins in January 1982. Gary had survived his round-the-world trip, but only just. He co-piloted a Cessna that nearly crashed onto a British road after a terrifying spiral. He later said these near-death experiences gave him a genuine strength and a new opinion of himself. He wasn't the android anymore, he was a survivor. He retreated to Rock City Studios in Shepperton to record what would become the album I, Assassin. He wanted to move away from the simplistic rut he felt electronic music was falling into. He wanted to groove, he wanted funk, But Numan-style funk is always a little colder, a little more clinical. The title comes directly from Truman Capote's 1980 book Music for Chameleons. In the preface, Capote talks about how he started writing when he was 8 and how his talent was a double-edged whip of a gift. Gary, who wrote the song while flying, found himself singing the melody so incessantly that it reportedly drove his co-pilot to distraction. But the real secret weapon of this track isn't a synthesizer, it's a person, a young Welsh session bassist called Pino Palladino. Before he was playing with The Who or D'Angelo, Pino was here playing a 1979 fretless Music Man Stingray. Numan had never heard anything like it. He pushed the bass so far to the front of the mix that it became the lead melody instrument. It's a 16-bar fretless explosion that serves as the song's actual hook. Released on the 22nd of February 1982, the single reached number 19 in the UK charts. It was slinky, it was weird, and it featured a B-side called Noise Noise that actually included guest vocals from Teresa Bazar of the pop duo Dollar, Numan's first use of female backing vocals. Incidentally, the Wikipedia entry explains that David Van Day was also there, giving quote-unquote helpful hints. Make of that what you will. The song's legacy is a strange one. It's remembered for its slick video, which some fans believe influenced Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal. But for a whole generation of comedy fans, including my good self, it's the song Alan Partridge plays air bass in his caravan. It's a gag that only works because that bass line is so undeniably, uniquely cool yet awkward. Gary Numan didn't stay retired. He couldn't. He found a way to change his skin, just like the Chameleons in the title. Next up, everyone's favourite Cockney uncles. Let's revisit the London pub in 1980. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of stale ale. On the small stage, there are two guys who look like they've just finished a shift at the docks. One hunched over a piano, fingers flying in a boogie-woogie blur, and the other thumping a bass. This is Chaz and Dave. They've just conquered the charts with Rabbit, a song we heard all the way back in episode 16.5, about a woman who simply won't stop talking, and they've become the faces of Rockney. It's exactly what it sounds like, a collision of pre-Beatles rock and roll and the knees-up sing-alongs of a Victorian music hall. They are the kings of the novelty hit, the guys who sung about Gertrude and the sideboard song. But underneath the Cockney shtick, there is a level of musicianship most people miss. Chaz Hodges was a session player for legends like Jerry Lee Lewis and Gene Vincent. These guys aren't just messing about. And as the new decade rolls into 1982, they're about to prove that a couple of gruff working class blokes can do more than just make you laugh. They can break your heart. This is Ain't No Pleasing You. Press play now. When we last left Chaz and Dave, they were riding high on Rabbit, which peaked at number 8 in January 1981 after a chaotic performance on the children's show Tiswas, which was retitled Flannet due to a copious amount of pies thrown, even for a show known for flinging custard pies in people's faces. They were everywhere, even recording Aussie's dream for Tottenham Hotspur's FA Cup run. But while they were the life of the party, something else was bubbling under the surface. The story of Ain't No Pleasing You starts in a small cottage in Ashton, East Northamptonshire in 1980. During a writing session for the track London Girls, a ballad-style melody suddenly appeared in Chaz's head. It didn't fit the Rockney mould, so they quickly hummed it onto a cassette and went back to their proper work. Fast forward to the recording of their album Mustn't Grumble at Portland Studios. Realising they were one song short, Chaz remembered that cassette. He also recalled his brother's account of being criticised by his wife while putting up a curtain, to which his brother had replied, "There ain't no fucking pleasing you, is there?" Chaz took that raw frustration and softened it into a story of a man finally walking away from a one-sided relationship. While he wrote the song largely on his own, a rare feat as most hits like Rabbit were collaborations, He consulted Dave Peacock every step of the way. For the rhythm, he was inspired by the tempo of John Lennon's Just Like Starting Over, which he described to Dave as a Fats Domino style tempo. The record company initially refused to release it as a single, doubting it would be a hit. It wasn't until they performed it on the Jim Davidson show on January the 5th, 1982 that the tide turned. The massive audience response forced the label's hand. Released as a single on March the 5th, 1982, the song entered the UK singles chart at number 62. To give it a bit more polish, Chas added a string arrangement of 8 violins and 2 cellos. This was overdubbed onto a rough mix from a tape that actually contained an editing error, resulting in an unusual number of beats, yet they preferred that version's feel. The song peaked at number 2 on April the 17th, 1982. Interestingly, the song which held them off the top spot was Seven Tears yet again, and then My Camera Never Lies by Bucks Fizz. Nevertheless, Ain't No Pleasing You became the biggest hit of their career and one of their most enduring achievements. A 12/8 time signature ballad that proved Chas and Dave were much more than just a novelty act. Talking of crowning achievements, here's another. Let's talk about the hair, or the lack of it, because in 1989, if you were a frontman in the burgeoning new romantic scene, you generally followed a very specific aesthetic checklist. You needed the frilled pirate shirt, the heavy rouge, and a mane of hair that looked like it had been styled by a Category 5 hurricane. But then there was Sal Solo. Sal looked like he'd stepped out of a high-fashion remake of Nosferatu. He was tall, imposing, and completely defiantly bold. He was the visual equivalent of a synthesizer's square wave, sharp, distinct, and impossible to ignore. When we last checked in with Classix Nouveaux, they were riding the momentum of their debut album Night People. Inside Outside had just brushed the lower reaches of the UK charts in late 1981, peaking at number 45, a song we heard in episode 27.5. The band had famously risen from the ashes of the legendary punk outfit X-Ray Specs. Drummer BP Herding and original guitarist Jack Airport were the bridge between polystyrene's neon punk screams and this new sleek futuristic gothicism. By the turn of the year, they were doing well and were strangely international. They were massive in Portugal, where they would eventually score a number 1 album. They were icons in Poland, but back home in the UK they were still outsiders looking in, waiting for that one moment where the melody finally caught up to the image. In late 1981, the band began work on their second album, La Vérité. There had been a shift. Gary Steadman had taken over on guitar, but the sound was leading harder into the electronics. They wanted something pop-oriented that still retained a sense of grandiose chic glamour, and they found it in a track that starts with drums which sound like they belong in Duran Duran and launches into a series of staccato barks about satisfaction and backbiting. This was the song that would define them, a track that managed to be both cold and operatic at the same time. From March 1982, reaching number 11 on the UK singles chart, the band's highest ever domestic peak, this is Classix Nouveaux with Is It a Dream? This is track 6, press play now. Is It a Dream is a strange, beautiful beast. It's soul-tinged but wrapped in a layer of icy synth pop. Sal Solo's vocals are doing all the heavy lifting here. That falsetto is so recognisable it becomes the band's calling card. It's a performance that feels like it's being delivered from the balcony of a haunted opera house. The success of Is It a Dream was particularly massive for the 12-inch market. According to an interview with Musines, Sal Solo noted that the Is It a Dream 12-inch sold more than any other 12-inch single EMI had ever handled up to that point. That success gave him the leverage to spend more time and more of the label's money on the follow-up, Because You Were Young. Solo recalled that because of the sales of Is It a Dream, the budget for their second album was twice that of the first. The album La Vérité followed in April 1982, reaching number 44 in the UK. While it didn't crack the top 40 at home, its impact internationally was staggering. It hit number one in Portugal, and the group toured extensively, even playing in India. They became pioneers of the Eastern Bloc tour, finding their most devoted fans in Poland. The band's largest ever crowd would eventually reach 25,000 people in Helsinki in 1983. One of the most enduring stories from this peak period involves the Saturday morning TV show Tiswas. Can you believe 2 Tiswas visits in the same episode? On April the 3rd, 1982, the very last episode of the original run, Sal Solo appeared on a VT insert. He thanked the team for having the band on to perform Is It a Dream 2 weeks prior, but apologised for missing a legendary pop interview. He expressed concern that none of the band had been flaned, hit by a custard pie. After a stagehand promptly obliged, Sal proceeded to shave custard off his bald head with a razor, a moment of surrealist comedy that perfectly captured the band's blend of high art and DIY absurdity. By the time their third album, Secret, arrived in late 1983, the landscape had shifted, however. Finnish guitarist Jimmy Suman had joined the ranks after being spotted as a warm-up act in Helsinki. Despite production from Alex Sadkin and arrangements by Anne Dudley, the album struggled in the UK, leading to the band being dropped by their label. Classix Nouveaux eventually split in 1985, with Sal Solo finding solo success with San Damiano before moving into Christian music. But for those weeks in 1982, they were the dream that actually came true. For our final track today, we are back with Genesis. In 1981, Genesis was a band in the middle of a radical identity shift. They had spent the 70s as the high priests of prog rock, crafting sprawling epics about giant hogweeds and fox-headed women. But by the time they reached the farm, the band's newly purchased private studio in Chiddingfold, Surrey, the capes were gone. They were stripping everything back. Their 11th studio album, Abacab, was the sound of a band throwing out their own rulebook. They were tired of the Genesis sound, so they hired Hugh Padgham, the engineer who helped Phil Collins develop the gated reverb drum sound, to help find them a more modern direct approach. The result was a record that felt sparse and occasionally quirky. You had the jagged title track, which we heard in episode 28, the soul-inflected No Reply at All, and the experimental Who Done It. But tucked away on side 2 was something different. It wasn't a group jam. It was one of only 3 tracks on the album written entirely by a single member, in this case Phil Collins. It was a song that looked away from the abstract and directly at the street. Here is Man on the Corner. This is track 7, playlist 38, our final track today. Man on the Corner was released as the final single from Abacab on the 5th of March 1982. It reached number 40 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and number 41 in the UK. Not bad, not great. Musically, it's a stark departure for Genesis, relying heavily on a cold mechanical heartbeat from a Roland TR-808 drum machine. This was the same machine Collins used to write the tracks for his debut solo album Face Value. Tony Banks added the atmosphere using 2 tracks of a Prophet 5 synthesizer, mostly using factory voices because Collins had written the demo on a stock version of the instrument. The lyrics mark a turning point for Collins as a songwriter. This was his first song to address the homeless epidemic and the general indifference of society. He was inspired by watching a man on a street corner who would shout at passers-by who chose not to see him. Collins speculates on the man's isolation, asking, "Do you love it enough to leave it, just like the lonely man there on the corner?" Of course, this will eventually lead to Phil Collins' 1989 solo smash, Another Day in Paradise. Man on the Corner is widely considered the thematic prelude to that track. Both address homelessness and the awkwardness people feel when confronted with it. However, where Another Day in Paradise features the iconic "Oh Think Twice" refrain and a more direct plea for empathy, Man on the Corner is darker, focused on the lonely man who is simply a vacant fixture on the urban landscape. Man on the Corner proved that Collins was beginning to look outward at social issues, a trend that would define some of his work across the rest of the 80s. So what an interesting playlist so far. But do stick around for the second half of playlist 38. Every now and again, we get an episode which is quintessentially 80s, and the next one is one of the biggest yet. The 80s clearly are in effect by now, but next week feels like you're living it. Visage are back. Japan deliver their magnum opus before splitting for good. We meet hairstyle icons, Flock of Seagulls. Can you believe we finally meet Elton John after all this time? We meet Shalimar, and we end with some Dollar. It's a bit of a monster. As always, if you're enjoying the pod and love your weekly diet of 80s nonsense, courtesy of yours truly, do hit the subscribe button, and if you can leave us a review on your pod platform of choice, it all helps. But until next time, looks like the sun is finally shining. Get outdoors and enjoy the spring, and we'll see you next time on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.